Jesus. Why did Russia give him asylum?
Well, first of all, I don't think. I mean, really, they were the only country that had the power, the strength to fight the U.S. and fight. I mean, they're hits on his lives. I mean, they have had entire articles. Woolsey, former CIA director Mike Morrell, the head of the Intel Committee, have all said he should be killed. He should be, in fact, hung from a tree by his neck.
Oh my
Conjuring lynching, for God's sake, as if that were not.
Is that a talking point? The neck thing? Is that?
That was a talking point because two different people
said it. Jesus Christ, that's scary.
I have to weekly. I mean, I get death threats for representing him. I just got detained at Heathrow for just going to London.
Is that on the record?
Yeah, I went on Democracy Now! Afterwards. And
how long did you get detained for? Why isn't it a news story?
It wasn't for, it didn't hit the mainstream media, of course. It wasn't that long, but they were asking me all about Snowden, why I'd been to Russia so much, assisting him, even a lawyer. I said, look, we have attorney-client privilege in the U.S., and the U.K. recognizes attorney-client privilege, so why am I being grilled about my relationship with a client? I'm trying to get into your country. I don't pose an immigration threat. I'm not a safety or security threat. And clearly it was because of Snowden.
Jesus
and this is why Sarah Harrison cannot travel back. David Miranda just was. It just got ruled that David Miranda, Glenn Greenwald's husband, was appropriately detained for 9 hours under the UK's anti-terrorism.
Oh my God!
But Snowden has no connection to terrorism. But of course, by tagging people.
Wait, who ruled that? Where was that ruling? In Britain or the
that
US?
That was in Britain.
Oh my God!
And it happened the day after I had been.
So any of us can be detained in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, I would not fly through. Right now, I will not be routing any more of my trips through England.
Christ.
I'll be going through Iceland instead. But the question of why did I go to Russia twice in 3 months? Well, I have a client there. I'm doing my job, and my job, unfortunately, has entailed representing a lot of whistleblowers being prosecuted for espionage.
God.
It's
Britain. How long did they hold you for? Keep you for?
No, it wasn't that long, but they were so. I mean,
were you allowed to call your lawyer?
I mean, no.
Were you alone in the room?
I was in this section, and Tom had already gone through, and he's like listening to this, and I'm trying to answer. They're asking me crazy questions like, who is Edward Snowden? And I know by that question that my answer is going to determine whether or not I get detained for 9 hours or whether or not I'm allowed to go through. Because if I just said he's a person or he's a human being, or if I was flip or belligerent.
How did they know you were representing him? I mean, I guess it's a matter of public record now, but
they had already. I was pulled out of line and told to go to a specific booth. So obviously,
before you got through security, while you were standing in the line,
off the plane. Yes, waiting to go through customs. I went in the line for people who were not EU or not UK. They had a line for us, and they pulled me out of that line and told me to go to a special kiosk. And in my mind, for every question, they're like, "Do you represent Bradley Manning?" And I just said, "No, I do not." Who is Bradley Manning? I said,
who are the people asking you?
They call it's their customs officials, but they call themselves the Border Force.
Right.
Again,
I've noticed that the militarization of civil policing.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, it's not right that journalists are being harassed. Journalists who cover disclosures, material that was put out by Snowden. But lawyers, for God's sake, people who represent Jeffrey Dahmer, people who represent serial killers and child molesters don't have this problem. Don't get grilled the way that I do.
How terrifying!
It was horrible, and I kept my composure during the interrogation, and then as soon as I was finally able to go through, I was just shaking. I broke down in tears. And Tom was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I can barely breathe." Like every single answer to these open-ended questions. Who's Bradley Manning? I said a whistleblower. Where's Bradley Manning? As if he didn't know. I'm like in jail. And he goes, that makes him a criminal, not a whistleblower.
Oh my God.
And so every single question I'm thinking, if I give the wrong answer, to this question, if I give the wrong answer to this question, I could be detained like David Miranda.
Yeah.
And, I have kids. I have 4 kids at home right now.
Jesus.
And it's the thought of, clearly they knew who I was. I was targeted. I was pulled out of line. I was grilled about my clients, grilled about my meeting with clients. And this stuff is attorney-client privilege, which both the U.S. and the U.K. recognize.
Of course.
And if that's the punishment or the retaliation for representing an unpopular client, then we're in real trouble. Because the whole foundation, I said, there are thousands of criminal defense attorneys who represent people who've done some pretty heinous stuff.
Well, that's the next, they've gone after the journalists, and now this is the next
Right.
target.
I feel like the common nexus was sort of anyone associated with Snowden, and it's kind of like that insane, overly broad comment made by Clapper that anyone who helps Edward Snowden with the disclosure of his information is aiding, abetting, conspiring. And I thought...
He said that at the Guardian forum where I was at, and he was threatening all the journalists there. There were 400 journalists there. Exactly. He said a version of that. Are you talking about another quote?
It was a different... Yeah, it was a different time.
He said it again.
He said it again.
What audience?
I have to look. I did a blog on it on Daily Codes that I'll find, but it plays into that whole, okay, if I'm assisting my client...
Criminalizing legal representation after criminalizing journalism.
Right, exactly. And it really is a frightening...
Terrifying.
Frightening term, exactly. And I know the UK has less press protection, and they've been bad on this, but this is why we fought a revolution against this kind of stuff. We fought an entire revolution against general warrants
Going
like
after
that.
the lawyers, I don't see, like, that's the last bastion. If they're harassing lawyers and...
Yeah, I said, I pled to the ABA. I said, please put out a statement. This is...
Would they? Did they?
They did not. They put out one today saying that they wrote a letter to the NSA asking how the NSA protects attorney-client privileged information, which it does not. There's no carve-out for attorney-client. There's no carve-out for doctor-patient. No. There's nothing. It's bulk collection because it is inclusive, not exclusive. But it's like when you wrote your book from 2008-9, that on steroids.
Right, I know. I will be talking about that.
You know, it's gotten so much worse.
God.
And, look, I was on the no-fly list during Bush, and that was really unfair. And that was because I was a whistleblower. No, that was because I was a whistleblower myself years before Thomas Drake. I represented Thomas Drake, and that was weird things happened, but they weren't of the scale or magnitude. But representing Snowden, I get hate mail. I'm a lawyer. I'm doing my job, and I get hate mail. I get threats. It's,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's. I've been to 15 countries in the last year, and I have never gone through that kind of questioning. Never until the UK.
This is a news story. Why aren't you going to the press?
I did. I went to Democracy Now. Kevin Gostola wrote a piece for Fire Dog Lake. It got tons of play in the alternative media. Nothing from the mainstream media. Nothing. And they didn't cover the fact that David Miranda the following day was found to have been a legitimate detention because he, under the UK terrorism law. And there was no coverage of the fact that it became public through the Snowden documents that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and everybody who visited WikiLeaks' website had been put on a list.
Whoa, I didn't know that either.
None of it was covered by the mainstream media here in this country. Alternative media covered it, but all 3 of those stories should have been.
Your story is a
mainstream
front page
media
New York Times story.
It should have been.
Well,
and they know how to reach me. I've been invited to write one by The Guardian. I can write one and submit it to the New York Times, but I don't know if they'll
Please write it for The Guardian so that you're getting into the news stream, and I'll blog about it, obviously. Oh, God.
So,
that's really chilling. I mean, each time I think it can't get worse.
It is very chilling.
This is a turning point.
It's a turning point.
If they go after the lawyers, there's what protection is there left,
Exactly.
There's nothing left.
And this, I was kind of mistakenly pictured the British as being so civilized and sort of,
They have been till recently.
And it's out of control. I mean, what happened to David Miranda with that's crazy.
God.
It's connecting. It's part of the narrative. By tagging people and charging them with espionage, you're making them into spy, terrorist, and that category. By charging Tom with espionage and John Kiriakou, who I also represent, and Bill Binney, they were making them enemies of the state.
Right.
And that makes you radioactive.
Of course.
And right now, even among the civil liberties community in D.C., we had a meeting with the usual suspects, and they were all conflicted about Snowden. I'm very conflicted. I'm very hand-wringy.
It's 1934.
Exactly. And I was like, I said, I'm really dismayed that the White House Internal Review Panel, a federal judge, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, tech giants can all recommend clemency, amnesty, or pardon, but the groups that should be supporting him are conflicted.
Why are they conflicted? Are they afraid of repercussions?
We're afraid that it will. We don't like the way he fled to Russia. We think he exposed too much. I mean, the usual memes we're hearing over and over again, and every week.
The civil liberties community.
I don't know. I said, why are you trying so hard to shoehorn the NSA's violations into existing laws?
Yeah.
They deliberately bypassed those laws, and here we're doing the government's bidding. We have a bunch of very highly intelligent, trained attorneys trying to figure out how PRISM might fit Section 215.
Oh, my God.
It doesn't. We don't need to try to do the government's homework for it. It violates these laws.
I don't get it. How could the civil liberties community be trying not...
The ACLU is one of his attorneys.
Right.
And at the same time, the ACLU is opposing any sort of whistleblower protection provision
Why?
being put into the surveillance legislation.
Why?
They say it will kill the legislation.
Oh, well,
the sponsors of it, Sensenbrenner and Leahy, told us it would not.
But I mean, maybe it's strategic. Maybe it's one thing at a time. I don't know.
I don't know.
Why not support? I don't get.
It's a conflict of interest.
So even if you don't like Snowden, how could you be so misguided as to think that passing legislation opposing what he revealed is
right.
Siding with Snowden? It's just addressing this horrible
Exactly.
catastrophe, right? I don't get how they're conflating those two things.
Exactly, but the same old memes. Even though I have written op-eds for New York Times and for The Guardian and for CNN and all over the place about every single Snowden rumor, they persist. And Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers have a platform, and they both just published op-eds in yesterday's Washington Times and LA Times. It's like they called each other in the morning to coordinate their op-eds, resurrecting rumors that have been out there for a long time that have already said he didn't flee to Russia. He fled to Latin America. They stopped him in Russia. The only reason he's in Russia is because of the U.S. That is the only reason. They pulled his passport while he was in the transit zone, giving him no option, rendering him stateless and giving him no option but to seek asylum there. To seek asylum, you have to be in the country from which you want asylum, usually, to actually. So he is in Russia. So of course he sought asylum there. And interestingly, 4 different countries found that he had a valid fear of political persecution based on political opinion, predicated upon the pretextual Espionage Act charges. Right. So the Face the Music crowd, exhibit number 1 to the Face the Music crowd is Tom Drake, who went through every conceivable proper internal channel.
But that was an earlier era when things weren't so draconian. I mean, not to minimize his courage, but...
And with Tom, it not only did it not redress a problem, it ended up they turned on him and prosecuted him. So even if Snowden had gone through the proper channels, he would be right where he is right now, charged with espionage.
I'm so sorry. I have to go to the
I'm sorry.
next. No, please. This was so valuable.